Christiana Figueres, many thanks for being with us. My first question, why do you think this climate deal is going to work?
Well, because it is actually fundamented on very, very strong drivers, which are national interests. We have 188 national climate change plans produced by 188 countries that are looking at what they can do, certainly to address climate change, but from their perspective of their national interest and what is actually going to move them forward. So it's, I think, actually on a very strong ground.
And what about implementation? Because getting that deal started was difficult. Implementation is going to be even more
difficult. Absolutely. I have said, without minimizing how difficult that was, now the difficult part starts. But fortunately, we don't start from zero. There are already an inordinate amount of initiatives and actions already in place. So implementation is actually partly just making sure that all of that runs forward. And then at a higher level, it's about aligning the strength and the impetus of technology, of finance and policy, and aligning all of that toward the decarbonization.
Each nation is free to define their own goals. How can you make sure they just don't go for the lowest common denominator?
Well, we know where they are. That is the baseline. What is important is where they're going to go. And that has already been established. It is going to be a process of continuous improvement, because every 5 years they will come to the table, they will report to each other what have they done, and they will assess what more can they do. So what's important is the direction of travel.
And when they don't do it?
And when they don't do it, they will be under a lot of peer pressure from each other. But more importantly, they're actually very, very clearly seeing that this is actually in their interest. It is in their national development interest. It is in the global economy and the national economy interest. So there's huge incentives here, because there's job creation, there's new industries that are going to be created, there's better energy security, there's better transport, there's improved health. There's just an inordinate amount of incentives that align.
And what about in terms of the low oil prices? Is that going to affect implementation? Because the IMF recently said that was of concern.
Well, interestingly enough, it hasn't yet, perhaps, but it certainly hasn't. What it has done is clear off the table a lot of very, very expensive potential oil explorations that would have been actualized, but they're now off the table because they depended on much higher oil prices. So everything that was expensive, drilling, profound water drilling, Arctic drilling, sour gas, all of those that actually should stay in the ground because we don't need them anymore, and they're too expensive. So those have been cleared away. And now I think the oil and gas industry is actually focusing and realigning itself to the lowest cost oil and gas reserves, which is probably the better way to go.
And finally, what about the US presidential election? So we know there are some presidential candidates who really aren't on board on this. How worried are you about that?
Well, I think the American public will be able to discern the difference. And, it is actually quite sad that this has turned into a partisan issue in the United States, because it certainly isn't. It is about economic competitive, where the whole of the United States should be standing united and behind that, because it is about which is the country that is going to produce the best renewable energy just in that sector, but also energy efficiency, smart metering, which is the country that is going to produce the technology of the future. Right now, it's India that's producing the technology of the future. Does the United States really want to be a second fiddle to China with respect to the future? I hope not.